Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. I'm going to start by telling you a bit about A Rocha. They're the Christian charity who run the eco-church scheme. Then I'll answer some questions about eco-church itself, what it is, how we can become an eco-church if we aren't one already, and then finally why I believe that every church should be an eco-church. So to start with, A Rocha, they're an international network of organisations, all Christian organisations, and they're operating at the moment in 21 different countries, in almost every country. And you can see from the stars and shields on this map just where they're operating. The name A Rocha, I'm told it should actually be pronounced A Rocha, because it's Portuguese meaning the rock. And that reflects the origins of the international A Rocha family in a field study centre located on the Alvor estuary in the Algarve in Portugal back in 1983. And so now, as I say, it's 21 organisations, including A Rocha in the UK, and they all share 5 values. Well, they're Christian, as we've said, and fundamentally they've been established as conservation organisations, particularly now responding to the global crisis of biodiversity. So they have community-based conservation projects, and that's very important, I think, that they're not just going in doing their own thing in their own way, but they're working with the local communities, getting local community involved in conservation projects, but also providing opportunities for people round about to experience nature. That's particularly important for city dwellers. And they're cross-cultural, so they work across different cultures. They try and work with the grain rather than just coming in and imposing their own British or Western ideas. And they work also, the 5th principle is cooperation. And so they do work with other like-minded organisations wherever possible. So organisations like Tear Fund and Christian Aid. And so particularly I've mentioned biodiversity. That really is their focus at the moment, the loss of biodiversity. We've heard a lot in recent years about climate change, much less about the loss of biodiversity, loss of species. But it's something that A Rocha has been aware of for a long time, and particularly working in that area. Okay, so that's the international scene. What do they do in the UK? Well, they have a number of projects. I'm going to talk about just 3. The first of which is A Rocha themselves run 2 nature reserves. The first is Wolf Fields. That's very much an urban setting in Southall in West London. And they also have Foxearth Meadows right out in rural Essex. And Wolf Fields, well, the picture you can see there showing all the rubbish, that was very characteristic of the site when A Rocha took it over. It was a wasteland, it was used to dump rubbish, it was used for drug taking and substance abuse. So first of all, A Rocha had to clear the site of rubbish, then they laid paths to improve access, they put up nesting boxes, they put up a bird feeding station to attract wildlife. And you can see the difference they've made in the picture on the right. And they also now have a community allotment. It's fully organic and it's lovingly maintained by the local community members. Now, both nature reserves, their central objective is to make nature available to a new generation of people who are disengaged from it. How many of you have come across young people who think that milk comes in plastic bottles from the supermarket and they don't even realise it comes from cows? So it's not about just engaging a new generation, but especially what A Rocha wants to do is reach out to the poor and vulnerable so that they can enjoy God's gift of creation. Then A Rocha are working with a number of partners in action. So it's a network of Christian land managers who are all demonstrating active care for the natural world in some way. So they're coordinated by A Rocha UK, and they work together in practical ways so they can participate in joint conservation work. A Rocha have a project called the Target 10 project, and a lot of the land managers are involved in that. They share ideas and information, and they pray for one another. Now, there are 12 partners in action altogether. There are 9 in England, and then 1 each in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And they currently include youth outdoor centres, community groups, intentional communities, and retreat centres. And they're all working for a positive impact on their land and for their visitors. And they're doing that out of a conviction that Christians have a responsibility to care for the natural world and for those who inhabit it. And so Rocha's hope and goal for Partners in Action is that it will increase accessibility to green spaces, enhance nature biodiversity, but also educate people about the environment. And so on to Eco-Church. So what is Eco-Church? Well, first of all, it's A Rocha's UK award scheme for churches in England and Wales who want to demonstrate that the gospel is good news for God's earth. Not just good news for people, but good news for creation, for God's wonderful creation. And it was developed by A Rocha, and it extends to any church in England and Wales. Scotland, there's a slightly different scheme running. But it's also not just about gaining an award, it's also about motivating and resourcing churches. I think that's really important. About helping churches to catch a vision of what they can do to care for God's earth. It's providing resources. It's not just expecting them to work out what they need to do, but then about helping them, having seen what they can do, what they need to do, actually providing the resources to help them see what they can do. And I firmly believe this about it being an integral part of their everyday work and mission. It's not just about tacking on something on the side, if you can do it, if you've got the people, if you've got the money. I really do believe it should be an integral part of what we do in our churches. And A Rocha's ultimate vision is for the scheme to create a vast network of churches as local centres of creation care in the community. At the moment, there's about 2,300 churches registered, of whom around 800 have moved on to one of the award levels that I'll talk about in a moment. And I think there's something like 50,000 churches in the country. So that's a long way to go, which means there's a lot of scope for churches to get involved. And I believe that it's about not just about caring for creation for our own sake, but also being centres of that within our local community, be it urban or rural, because I believe we've got a hope to offer, especially perhaps at this time, and certainly when we come out of lockdown. I think a lot of people are hoping for a brighter environment, which I believe we in our churches can show the way. So then, who runs Eco-Church? Well, it's run by A Rocha UK, and the website is an A Rocha website, but it's also run in partnership with some different churches, church denominations, and a couple of charities, Christian Aid and Cheer Fund. But beyond that, it's actually supported by denominations and organisations right across the church in England and Wales. And here I just have to change to sharing. I think it's this screen. So yes, these are the organisations, the denominations that stand behind it. So denominations, various charities, the John Ray Institute is JRI, who've produced a lot of hugely helpful material, particularly on climate change and combining science and faith. Pioneer churches, URC. So So it's widely supported, at least at an institutional level, if not by individual churches. So how does it work then? Well, if your church isn't already registered as an eco-church, then you sign up on their website to register your church. Costs absolutely nothing just to register. That then gives you access to an online survey, eco-survey, that you complete, and you do that to show how your church is caring for God's earth. And it covers 5 different areas of life and work. And so it starts with worship and teaching, but it goes on to buildings and land, and then the wider picture: how are you engaging with community? What about global engagement? And then it comes back to lifestyle, what we do as a church, and what we encourage our church members to do, and lifestyle covers both of those. So let me give some examples, or just show you a few of the questions and show you the survey. Hopefully. Right. So actually this is from my own church. So when you first go in to the survey, what you see is you have a little block for each of the 5 areas, and at the top of that you have a bar chart which shows where you've got to, and you can go through stages: bronze, silver and gold, and you need to go through all of the 5 categories. And if you're in a church that has no land, for example, you can switch off the land part. If you're in a building that isn't your own, then you can switch off that part. But otherwise, there are the 5 areas, and for each of them, there's a number of different questions to answer. So let me just show you 1 or 2 examples. So under worship and teaching, here's the first question you get asked. So do you have special Sundays? Do you celebrate special Sundays, caring for God's earth? So creation time, or Environment Sunday, Irrigation Sunday as well can be used. And it's not just simply yes or no, but you can say, we do this at least annually, we only do it occasionally, we never do it. Or maybe you don't know, and you need to find out. Maybe you've only been in the church a short while, and you've never been aware of this, but you may be able to go and find out and talk to other people. And you can move straight to the next question from there. And this is about hymns and songs and liturgies. If you're a liturgical church, do those enable you to celebrate God's creation? And how often do you do that? Quarterly? Is it less often? Never. Again, do you need to find out? Let's look at just 1 more question in this category. And this is about communications. So if you're a church that hands out, or perhaps at the moment under lockdown, emails out, newsletters, service sheets, magazines, do you include items relating to the theme of caring for God's earth? Now, we used to when we had a printed magazine. We're hoping to come back to that. We're developing some environmental web pages on our church website. So at the moment, we don't have the web pages yet, and we don't have that. But if you have a magazine, you might put things in that, or even in the notice sheet, maybe quarterly, maybe just every so often. So that's just a couple of examples from that category. If we go to lifestyle and look at that, just a couple of questions here. So let's look at the first question. Is about, does your church have an individual or group to champion the cause of our church community becoming more environmentally sustainable? There is a straight yes or no. In my church, St Paul's, we do. Just take another question. Do we encourage members to reduce their personal energy consumption? So that's, we can't force, obviously, people to do that, but we can encourage people to do so. We can show them the benefits. And in our case, we've said we do this occasionally, but potentially you could do this regularly. And one thing you can do is see, as you go through these, how much difference it makes. So if, for instance, we were doing this regularly, I could click on that, and if you look at the score at the top, at the moment it's 59 out of 160. If we were doing that regularly, we could push our score up to 62. So you can actually see what difference it would make. And also from this, you can see what you might do to move up through the categories, to do more to care for God's creation. So the survey does two things. It helps you to see where you are at the moment. I'll restore that. It helps you to see where you are at the moment in lots of different areas, but it also helps you to see what more you can do to care for God's earth. So as I say, it's free to go on the website, but if you actually want to save your survey and then be able to go back to the survey and see how you're doing, review, see what more you can do, then you actually need to register. So let me now go back to the presentation. So as I say, as you work through, you pick up points as you answer the questions in the survey. You may find you've already achieved bronze, maybe even silver. I certainly spoke to someone from one church recently who, when they'd gone through the survey, they find they'd already reached silver. Great, fantastic. But you might find you've more to do. And so the survey shows you what more you could actually do. And also to say it's freely available on the Eco Church website, but if you want to save your responses, you need to register. But if you've then created an account, you can then go back, you can update your survey responses as you undertake new actions and initiatives by way of caring for creation. So this is actually our own one of St Paul's Church. So we're in a way washing our dirty, showing our dirty laundry to you all. So when you come into the survey, what you see is you have these 5 areas I've mentioned. And what you see also is a little bar which shows what level you're at. There's 3 levels: bronze, silver and gold, and a number of different questions in each category, not the same number of questions either. So there's the 5 areas, and I know that, well, most Church of England churches do have both buildings and land. In cities they don't always have land or green land like a churchyard. Some churches actually don't have buildings. I was speaking to a church a month or so ago in Tame that meets in a school, and if the church doesn't have its own buildings, then it can switch this off or switch this off as appropriate. So let me just show you 1 or 2 of the questions, just to give you a flavour of how it works. So the first question under teaching is, do you have special Sundays relating to caring for God's earth that are celebrated in your church? And it's not a yes or no question. You can say, well, we do this at least annually. We don't ever do it, or never. Or you may need to find out. So I guess if you're a member of a church and you've been there a while, you probably do know. But as I say, you do have the option to give different answers. We could look at the next question. What about the hymns and songs? And if you've got liturgies, do they enable you to celebrate God's creation? And how much do you do that? Let's find a different question. What about communications? Do you have newsletters? Do you have service sheets or whatever, a magazine that you give out? Do they have items relating to the theme of caring for God's earth? We did in St Paul's. For various reasons, we stopped the printed one. We're just beginning to develop some web pages now on our website. And again, you can say how often you're doing this or that you need to find out. So that's just a couple of examples from the worship and teaching. Let's just look at lifestyle. This is the one where sort of hanging out our dirty washing, we're only on bronze. So let's just have a look at a couple of the questions here. So do we have an individual or group to champion the cause of our church community becoming more environmentally sustainable? And it's about the church community as well. Yes, we do have a group that does that. Well, you're listening to two of us this afternoon, and there are a few others involved now. Different.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it changed format again since we have.
Sorry, there's a problem? Another question is about the church encouraging members to reduce their personal energy consumption. And here you can see you've got different types of answers. You've got regularly, occasionally, never, and so on. And you as a church would go through all 5 categories, all of the questions, and you'll get scored on them. One thing you can actually see is if you change your answer, you can actually see up there how your score changes. So if we did this regularly, we'd gain an extra 3 points. So it does rely a bit on honesty, but I'm sure we are all honest and we wouldn't want to oversell ourselves. So let's go back to where that was, which was occasionally. So you can actually see by playing around with these where you get the most extra points.
Without all those questions like and in the past.
Is there a problem, or are people just chatting there? I'm sorry, I'm hearing other voices.
I don't know, I think just carry on, Philip.
Okay.
Everything's fine my end.
Good. Right, back to a couple more slides, and then I'm going to hand it over to Sheila for a bit. Right. Okay, so your score's automatically calculated, as I say, and that determines whether you've achieved bronze, silver or gold award. So here's where we are at St Paul's. In 4 of the categories, we're at silver. Basically, to get silver, you have to be over 50% of the possible points in each category. But we're only at, in fact, only just at bronze level for lifestyle. So overall, because we've got one category that's still bronze, overall we're still at bronze level, even though we're well into silver for 3 and just into silver for 1, because we're down in bronze category. So with that, unfortunately, is where we are at the moment, but we are looking at that, and Sheila will tell us more about that in a moment. Okay, so if you qualify for an award, you can then apply online for a certificate, and then you can get one of these wooden plaques if you like, but you get the certificate anyway. And if you don't qualify for an award, or you want to move to the next level, so you're at bronze and you want to get to silver, you're at silver and you want to get to gold, there are resources to help you on the Eco Church website. There's a huge lot of resources, so let me just share this window. So yes, so there's resources which give you things to think about, something to do, and then more that you can do. And they're arranged under the 5 categories. So worship and teaching, buildings and land, and there's quite a few in each, especially on buildings, and then community and global, and lifestyle. So, for instance, near the bottom of buildings, we've got one on cups. And so it talks about the different kinds of cups that are available. And let's try. So yes, so it gives you some ideas. It suggests things to think about, things to do. And then what more could you do with various ideas. And on the right-hand side, there's a lot of very helpful links. So it's not just ideas here, but then it links out to other websites, so that there's actually a huge amount of information you can get hold of. So I think it's time for me now to hand over to Sheila, who's going to tell you a bit about our journey in St Paul's. So over to Sheila.
Right, I'm muting. Okay, it's quite a long time ago. I'm realising it's actually 10 years ago, back in the early 2000s, when a group of us at St Paul's formed a sustainability group, and we fretted a bit about our energy use. We changed quite a lot of light bulbs, and we wrote articles encouraging environmental sustainability, which were published in our church magazine, which was what we had then. And when the congregation as a whole made the decision to extend our church buildings, we became very involved in identifying sustainable options. So next slide, please. So this is a rough timeline of our journey. So we started doing our building work back in 2009, finished somewhere around 2010. The Eco Church Awards scheme started in 2016, so that was when we applied and eventually achieved our bronze certificate in 2017, and that's quite a long time ago now. So we're now looking at the silver award certificate, if we can. Next slide, please. So when the buildings were being planned, we suggested an awful lot of improvements to the way that the buildings were made, and so we used as much natural light as we could. We had light, I can't remember what they're called, light flows. We had a lot of secondary glazing to the existing windows, and we installed photovoltaic panels on the roof of the hall. We had a problem that we couldn't do much in the church at that time because that's not encouraged anyway, and we had stained glass in our church windows. Sorry, can I have the next slide? We also recommended that the construction process for our building work was done with recycled materials for hardcore, and that we did not demolish any existing buildings but merely extended with new buildings. So then in 2016, which is quite a while after the building work was finished, but we were meantime working on things, but we applied to A Rocha for the Bronze Award in 2016. And we, of course, soon immediately found out that we scored highly on our church buildings, but not in other areas. So, and because the church award is basically a box ticking process, we could see in which areas we needed to improve. So our worship and teaching score was particularly low, because although we all contributed prayers focusing on the environment, there was very little clergy input at the time. So we organised a guest speaker from A Rocha, and we also had a sermon by a local environmental enthusiast from another church who was happy to come and speak at our church. And we also planted a wildflower garden, not the one on the slide, but one similar to that. And we initiated composting. And then we also continued to support environmental charities like A Rocha, also Peer Funds, and also Land for Life in Argentina. So can we go on to the next slide, please, Philip? So those actions got us up to Bronze Award. So we achieved the Bronze Award in 2017. It did require quite a lot of effort to get there, but and we haven't moved much from there at the moment, although we're working on it. So having realised that the rest of our scores are actually edging towards silver, as you saw when Philip showed you on the slide earlier, we had to try and find out what we could do to upgrade our lifestyle section scores to get us up to a silver mark. So we did invite more guest speakers to speak on environmentally sustainable living, and we continued to pray for creation care. Some other actions that made a difference in our school. We changed our energy supply to a completely renewable option, and we confirmed that our church used recycled toilet paper, and also that we used environmentally friendly cleaning products. These changes don't sound much, but they actually sometimes take quite a long time to do. And instead of a wildflower garden, we planted perennial insect-friendly plants, because the wildflower meadow is not really a sustainable option. And we're still composting, still supporting A Rocha UK and other environmental charities, and working on changes to other lifestyle criteria. We can see that more action is needed actually in the personal lifestyles of church members. And this is something that is quite difficult to do. So we are planning in the future to offer carbon footprinting to church members, to encourage people to use fair trade, and to apply loaf principles to our catering facilities. These will be fairly challenging actions to complete, but we're quite committed to do that. It's all going to be a bit slow, but we just take small steps at a time. We've been particularly encouraged during this process. We have the final slide. Right, loaf principles are local, organic, affordable, and fair trade items for food. Okay, so we've had encouragement from publications like from Ruth Valerio, also John Ray Institute and Operation Noah. We've been involved quite a lot with Sustainable St Albans, and that's given us much encouragement to move along on our way. And we're also revising many of our previous communications to send out electronically. Okay, I think that's about it, but I would encourage any churches to get onto the process as soon as you can, because it's quite encouraging. When you start, people will encourage you on. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. By the way, the A in loaf, I always thought was animal friendly.
Oh, right.
Local, organic, animal friendly, and fair traded.
Friendly and fair trade, yeah, both of those work, I think.
Right. Okay. So if you're not an eco church, or even if you are, I think this is still relevant for you. Let's go back to the Church of England's 5 marks of mission. I know not all of you are in Anglican churches, but I think most churches probably would have something like this. But the 5th mark is to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. So creation care, whatever you want to call it, caring for God's earth, is integral to our mission as a church, as churches, and as the wider church, and belongs with all the other parts of it, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. In fact, I think it helps with all of these. So let's have a look at, in a little bit more detail about what it actually means and why this is important. Well, if you go on the Anglican Communion website version of the 5 marks of mission, it precedes the 5 by saying the mission of the church is the mission of Christ. So it's not something that the church has just thought up and think, well, this is a good idea. We believe it is actually the mission, the full mission that Jesus Christ calls us to. And you might say, oh, well, what about scripture? You know, where does Jesus say anything like this? How can we claim that? Well, actually, if you go back to the end of Mark's Gospel, and this is one of the endings of the Gospel, I know not everyone accepts it as being part of the original Gospel, but we read, and Jesus said to the disciples, go into all the world and proclaim the good news to the whole creation. Now, if he'd wanted to say to all of humankind, all people, then there would be a different Greek word. But it says the whole creation. And I find that really interesting and challenging. Now, you might think, oh, well, how on earth do you proclaim the good news to a blackbird, for example? And okay, so we don't speak blackbird's language, even if we use Twitter, but we can help to create an environment in which blackbirds will strive. And in that way, we demonstrate God's love for them and not just for ourselves. So I think actually by proclaiming the good news to the whole of creation, we're there. This comes back then to the first mark of mission, which is proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. But it's saying that that good news isn't just good news for people, it's good news for all of creation. And I think that's absolutely amazing that we have that mission. But moving on, when it's a key concern, I think, of many outside the church, especially young people. Okay, so now we're all obsessed, I guess, with COVID-19, but when that threat's gone or retreated, climate change will still be there, loss of biodiversity will still be there. And I think there'll be once again a concern, a key concern of many outside the church. And I think historically, many Christians have been actually slow to talk about these issues, but I think that's changed. And Christians are becoming increasingly vocal within our churches. I don't know how much that's seen outside, but I believe that we can use our concern for the environment, and I talked earlier about being beacons within our communities. We can use our concern for the environment actually to connect with many outside the church, all the people outside the church who are concerned about biodiversity loss and about climate change, so they can see, so people can see that we share that concern. And I think that gives us an entry point to be able to talk to them. And I talked about A Rocha's vision about eco-church creating a vast network of churches as local centres of creation care, shining beacons of hope for a brighter environmental future. I think that community aspect of being a witness to the community, but also sharing their concerns, we can offer hope. But that's a hope for us that's securely rooted in and springing from our faith. And I think I'd then say, well, if we're going to fulfill the second mark of mission, then, which is teaching, baptizing and nurturing new believers, we need new believers. And I believe that integrating care for God's earth into our mission will bring us closer to those who are yet to believe. But of course, we have to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And I think Eco-Church helps us to do that. Just a few more points, more or less to wrap up. I think these pretty well speak for themselves about the Eco-Church survey. So it covers, I think, pretty thoroughly all the areas that we need to consider, some of which you may not have thought of are actually relevant to caring for God's earth. And where you discover you could do more, and I think you almost certainly will find there's more you can do, then there's plenty of resources on the website, as I've shown you, to help you on your way. Now, I've said it's free, but making the changes may not be. Well, it depends what changes you're going to make. If it's about heating your churches, then yes, it'll cost money up front, even though it saves you money in the long term. We were at St Paul's, we were lucky in a way we could incorporate changes as part of a major building project. But it strikes me that not all changes need cost money. So if, for example, you have a churchyard, you may simply need to change the way you look after that to enable insect-friendly plants to prosper. And if you haven't yet, if you didn't listen to or haven't yet looked at Judith Evans' Living Churchyards webinar last week, then there's a lot of helpful stuff in that about managing your lands. And then I think becoming part of Eco-Church, you become part of a community of churches who are united by a common purpose. And that common purpose is demonstrating that the gospel is good news, not only for people, but for God's earth. So At the bottom, you've got links here to the A Rocha website and to the Eco Church website. You can make a note of them now, or when the presentation's emailed to you, you'll see them. So thank you very much for listening and watching.